All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Mahajer, and I'm the Vice President of the Iranian American Democrats of California. On behalf of IADC and the Democracy Council of California, I want to thank you for being here today for civil society and opposition in Iran, implications for policymakers. Today, we are joined by subject matter experts and community leaders to not only honor the ongoing protests for civil and human rights for the people of Iran, but also provide perspective and suggested solutions towards a more comprehensive policy and appropriated programs that help the aspirations of the Iranian people, because a stable and democratic and thriving Iran is good for the region and it is within the interest of the United States. Meanwhile, we offer the disclaimer that the views expressed here are not opinions of either IADC or DCC, but rather a presentation of fact-finding and a consortium of top voices that can help guide you in your future policy-making decisions. While idealism allows us to conjure a bold vision for a better tomorrow, it is pragmatism that allows us to achieve it. A balance of both is needed in this work. We will also discuss the results of the first ever poll of Iranian American voters in California, the largest and most diverse community outside of Iran, and their uniform bipartisan desire for a secular and democratic Iran. We hope to give you some context as to the transformative events that have changed the socio-political environment, both in Iran and for Iranians here at home. Today is a significant day. As you all know, on September 13th, 2022, a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman named Mahsa, Jina, Amini was taken in custody in Iran by the so-called morality police merely for having a few strands of her hair exposed, in violation of the country's compulsory hijab law, which forces the citizens of Iran to live under draconian and harsh social and religious restrictions with which they must comply under threat of violence, torture, or execution. She sadly passed away 3 days later on September 16, 2022. Since then, the people of Iran have taken to the streets, and women and girls are displaying utmost bravery through peaceful civil disobedience. They are demanding their basic human rights, the right to self-determination, freedom of choice, freedom of expression, and ultimately, democracy. Unlike previous protest movements that have arisen in Iran over the last 4 decades since the Islamic Revolution, the ongoing protests have demonstrated longevity and resilience, despite a brutal and violent crackdown by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that has included countless arrests and killings, including of young children, sexual assault of women and men thrown in prisons, and the poisoning of young schoolgirls with toxic gases. Also, here in the United States and across the globe, the Iranian American community has been activated. What we have seen unleashed amongst the Iranian diaspora is several decades of repressed trauma from having fled a country that they loved and lost, and a sudden and unprecedented engagement in local activism and indeed politics that we have not seen ever before. For the first time in almost half a century, Iranian democratic opposition voices were afforded global media coverage, met with world leaders, and replaced Islamic Republic officials at international fora. The country was ousted from the UN's top legislative body on women's rights, and a landmark UN Human Rights Council fact-finding mission offered hope in tackling systemic impunity in Iran. These unprecedented achievements were a testament primarily to the immense courage of the Iranian people, but also to the unity of the diaspora against the regime of the time. Because we are separated by oceans and the international press are generally forbidden from entering Iran, the Iranian American community instead is turning to our elected officials to offer solutions to the Iranian people in our shared and common quest for democracy. We are delighted to be in your presence today and look forward to having an engaging set of panels for you. At this time, I want to invite Mr. Jim Price, President of Democracy Council of California, who will be the moderator for the first panel, Voices of Civil Society Programs for Iran, to provide the welcome message on behalf of the Democracy Council of California and subsequently invite the esteemed guests of the first panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. I'm Jim Prince of the Democracy Council. A couple quick housekeeping issues. We know that this week is a very, very difficult and challenging, fun-filled week for those inside the Beltway, so we greatly appreciate your presence here today. This program is on the record. We expect the program will be posted, the video will be posted, and if past experience holds true, it will resonate and will generate discussions going forward online in the next few weeks. COVID, the pandemic is not over. It did strike us. We've had a speaker come down with COVID, another speaker came down with another illness. So Congressperson Barbara Lee will not be attending. She is voting, hopefully the right way. Her staff member, Greg Adams, is also ill. Majdi Khaliji from Washington Institute, someone that we know very well and appreciate, has come down with COVID. So there are a few gaps in the program, but we are honored to have not only experts, but people that are, frankly, doing stuff to help the Iranian people every day. We expect a very free-flowing discussion. We expect audience participation. Feel free to make your questions direct, to the point. Don't hide questions in comments. You are free to announce yourself during the question and answer period if you feel comfortable. And we would appreciate just maybe one follow-up per person. Thank you. We have our first panel, Lily, Eric, and Nazanin. I cannot think of someone more qualified, more appropriate to lead off today's discussion. Eric, who I assume everyone here knows personally or knows of, has been involved at the highest levels on everything to do with U.S.-Iran policy, doing internet freedom for decades, back when Eric and I were a little bit less blonde. I'm not going to go through his biography. You should have that in front of you. But he is someone that legislators, policymakers, activists, analysts consult with, take his advice on every day. We are honored to have him here lead off our discussion today. Eric?
Great, thank you, Jim. Really appreciate it. What I've done is to kind of focus this talk on the cyberspace aspects of civil society and opposition in Iran. Realizing that we're here to commemorate the terrible events of 1 year ago, and also the protests that followed the death of Mahsa Amini. Because Iran is under sanctions, and because many countries, including the United States, does not have diplomatic relations with Iran, the major way that we keep in contact with Iranian citizens is in the online world. We have to keep in mind that the government of Iran is daily hard at work trying to keep all these good people in this room from informing Iranians what is happening in their own country and elsewhere in the world, and the reverse. Now, that means that the U.S. government, and in particular the Department of State and some other agencies that I'm going to mention, are in the forefront of bringing access to a free, unfettered, flat, and open internet to the Iranian people. And that is sometimes a very underappreciated activity. But without it, all the good work that we do, the articles we write, the blog posts we make, and anything that we write will not reach the intended audience unless we have the proper technologies and the will to keep the internet open for Iran. So let's go to the next page here. first thing I want to say is that, especially with regard to Iran, internet freedom and internet freedom funding has had strong bipartisan support. The first resolution, which I've quoted here, in 2009, has been followed by 7 congressional resolutions. In fact, most of them passed unanimously in both houses of Congress. How many times do we think that a piece of legislation or a sense of Congress resolution, Jim, has passed unanimously in both houses?
Not anymore.
Right? Not, well, but this track record continues to maintain itself. And so there has to be something there for all 535 of our representatives to support it. And this has also been matched by increases in funding for programs around the world, but specific to Iran as well. So if we go to the next page, I went back to the fiscal year 2016, and I said, well, how much on a global basis are we spending on programs to open the internet in repressive environments? And that includes Iran. It includes other countries like Burma, Myanmar, Cuba, Venezuela, China, Russia, Belarus, and so on, but also a large proportion of these funds go to programming in Iran. And I just calculated the percent change through the current fiscal year, which expires at the end of this month, and we have gone from a little over $57 million in 2016 to over 90 million US dollars in total funding in the current fiscal year. I don't know what the bill looks like. Congress has got to pass 12 appropriations bills in the next 2 weeks. When you see the one for the Department of State and Foreign Operations, it's account number 150 in the appropriations bill. We will probably see at least, I hope, 90.5 and maybe even more money from that. But the point is that we have increased funding. At the same time, what we lack is a whole of government strategy on all of these things. If you look at this laundry list of these 6 items, these funds have to be dispersed amongst all of these activities. I have to say that there is substantial overlap among the agencies that perform this work. They do make an effort to try and coordinate things so they're not duplicating efforts, but it's really insufficient in today's world. What has changed? What has changed is that we now have the technical capabilities, and you'll hear this in some of the presentations that follow a little bit later this morning, population level impact. Through these technologies, we can reach up to 10, 20, 30, maybe even 50% of the Iranian population. Think about that. The people in this room can have more influence on public opinion in Iran than the government of Iran if we do it right. But at the same time, if these funds are not used for these concentrated purposes, they tend to be funded in very, very small projects which may not be able to reach scale. So you'll see when I get to my recommendations that the situation is improving, but we're not there yet. Let's go to the next page. And this, again, I want to emphasize that the game has changed. First of all, it's critical to get information into Iran, particularly exposing the hypocrisy and corruption of the regime. Secondly, to get information out from a human rights perspective. What is the government doing? What is civil society doing? How are people being organized? What kinds of support and help do they need? And then finally, to help Iranians help themselves. That is, to be able to communicate freely amongst civil society and activist groups in a secure manner. There are some technologies being developed that will help with secure communications. I'm hoping that those applications can serve the Iranian people and civil society in the very near future. Not only that, but the government of Iran has become increasingly sophisticated at trying to put a stop to what we are doing. Their censorship technologies are increasingly aggressive. They have blocked applications off and on or shut down services on the internet from time to time, mobile services, as well as an entire national internet shutdown. This followed in the protests of 2022, but also a major shutdown in November of 2019, and an attempt to actually consolidate the national internet in what is known as the NIN, or National Information Network, to try and increasingly control these things. On the other hand, there is a huge appetite for free and open information. If you go to the next slide. And my thanks to Ali Tarani and the audience there for bringing this great report to my attention. I believe you had a hand in supplying a lot of the data for this. Thank you for that. But if you haven't seen this report, this is an excellent report on the appetite for Iranian civil society for free and open media. And so if you want to leverage your messaging through the tech platforms that we have available to bypass censorship, you can get a very, very good profile of what Iranians like, what they are reading, and what there is a demand for. So finally, how am I doing on time, Jen? Okay, a couple minutes? All right. So in a very general way, you'll see some presentations that follow that where we can go into these issues a little bit more deeply. But beginning in 2022, I was asked to help the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to look at an overall internet strategy, which would include an internet freedom strategy for Iran. Those efforts continue. I think we owe a lot to Representative Barbara Lee and her staff for doing this on the House side. This needs continual attention, support, advocacy to make sure that we have a whole of government approach to responding to the next set of protests, which will inevitably come. We don't know when, but I think many groups in civil society have really learned their lesson, and they know how to play the game at this point. I don't think at all that the government in Iran can declare victory whatsoever. And secondly, really sustain funding and tech support for population-level impacts, which you'll learn about a little bit later, and leverage these tech platforms to help bootstrap other technologies. Once you have success and you have a very large audience, it's much easier to take some of these new technologies and integrate them into these platforms. These can be done through APIs, application programming interfaces, or software development kits, rather than try to build an audience from zero. And in most cases probably not succeeding well. And then finally, I think we're also going to hear a little bit about sanctions. And I just wanted to mention that having been the author of General License D1, that was really our first step into opening the aperture for information technologies to Iranians. That license was amended a few times. Now it has been expanded with General License D2. And there are some efforts underway to expand it even further. This really helps as well because it gives the technology platforms around the world some top cover that they will not be sanctioned themselves by helping the Iranian people. So with that, I hope I've stimulated more questions than I have answers, probably so, and I'll turn the program back over to Jim. First thing I want to say is that, especially with regard to Iran, internet freedom and internet freedom funding has had strong bipartisan support. The first resolution, which I've quoted here in 2009, has been followed by 7 congressional resolutions. In fact, most of them passed unanimously in both houses of Congress. How many times do we think that a piece of legislation or a sense of Congress resolution, Jim, has passed unanimously in both houses?
Not anymore.
Right? Not, well, but this track record continues.
I'm not going to go through his biography. You should have that in front of you. But he is someone that legislators, policymakers, activists, analysts consult with, take his advice on every day. We are honored to have him here lead off our discussion today. Eric?
Great, thank you, Jim. Really appreciate it. What I've done is to kind of focus this talk on the cyberspace aspects of civil society and opposition in Iran. Realizing that we're here to commemorate the terrible events of 1 year ago, and also the protests that followed the death of Mahsa Amini. Because Iran is under sanctions, and because many countries, including the United States, does not have diplomatic relations with Iran, the major way that we keep in contact with Iranian citizens is in the online world. We have to keep in mind that the government of Iran is daily hard at work trying to keep all these good people in this room from informing Iranians what is happening in their own country and elsewhere in the world, and the reverse. Now, that means that the U.S. government, and in particular the Department of State and some other agencies that I'm going to mention, are in the forefront of bringing access to a free, unfettered, flat, and open internet to the Iranian people. And that is sometimes a very underappreciated activity. But without it, all the good work that we do, the articles we write, the blog posts we make, the and anything that we write will not reach the intended audience unless we have the proper technologies and the will to keep the internet open for Iran. So let's go to the next page here. The first thing I want to say is that, especially with regard to Iran, internet freedom and internet freedom funding has had strong bipartisan support. The first resolution, which I've quoted here in 2009, has been followed by 7 congressional resolutions. In fact, most of them passed unanimously in both houses of Congress. How many times do we think that a piece of legislation or a sense of Congress resolution, Jim, has passed unanimously in both houses?
Not anymore.
Right? Not, well, but this track record continues to maintain itself. And so there has to be something there for all 535 of our representatives to support it. And this has also been matched by increases in funding for programs around the world, but specific to Iran as well. So if we go to the next page, I went back to the fiscal year 2016, and I said, well, how much on a global basis are we spending on programs to open the internet in repressive environments? And that includes Iran. It includes other countries like Burma, Myanmar, Cuba, Venezuela, China, Russia, Belarus, and so on, but also a large proportion of these funds go to programming in Iran. And I just calculated the percent change through the current fiscal year, which expires at the end of this month, and we have gone from a little over $57 million in 2016 to over 90 million US dollars in total funding in the current fiscal year. I don't know what the bill looks like. Congress has got to pass 12 appropriations bills in the next 2 weeks. When you see the one for the Department of State and Foreign Operations, it's account number 150 in the appropriations bill. We will probably see at least, I hope, 90.5 and maybe even more money from that. But the point is that we have increased funding. At the same time, what we lack is a whole of government strategy on all of these things. If you look at this laundry list of these 6 items, these funds have to be dispersed amongst all of these activities. I have to say that there is substantial overlap among the agencies that perform this work. They do make an effort to try and coordinate things so they're not duplicating efforts, but it's really insufficient in today's world. What has changed? What has changed is that we now have the technical capabilities, and you'll hear this in some of the presentations that follow a little bit later this morning, population level impact. Through these technologies, we can reach up to 10, 20, 30, maybe even 50% of the Iranian population. Think about that. The people in this room can have more influence on public opinion in Iran than the government of Iran if we do it right. But at the same time, if these funds are not used for these concentrated purposes, they tend to be funded in very, very small projects which may not be able to reach scale. So you'll see when I get to my recommendations that the situation is improving, but we're not there yet. Let's go to the next page. And this, again, I want to emphasize that the game has changed. First of all, it's critical to get information into Iran, particularly exposing the hypocrisy and corruption of the regime. Secondly, to get information out from a human rights perspective. What is the government doing? What is civil society doing? How are people being organized? What kinds of support and help do they need? And then finally, to help Iranians help themselves. That is, to be able to communicate freely amongst civil society and activist groups in a secure manner. There are some technologies being developed that will help with secure communications. I'm hoping that those applications can serve the Iranian people and civil society in the very near future. Not only that, but the government of Iran has become increasingly sophisticated at trying to put a stop to what we are doing. Their censorship technologies are increasingly aggressive. They have blocked applications off and on or shut down services on the internet from time to time, mobile services, as well as an entire national internet shutdown. This followed in the protests of 2022, but also a major shutdown in November of 2019, and an attempt to actually consolidate the national internet and what is known as the NIN, or National Information Network, to try and increasingly control these things. On the other hand, there is a huge appetite for free and open information. If you go to the next slide. And my thanks to Ali Tarani and the audience there for bringing this great report to my attention. I believe you had a hand in supplying a lot of the data for this. Thank you for that. But if you haven't seen this report, this is an excellent report on the appetite for Iranian civil society for free and open media. And so if you want to leverage your messaging through the tech platforms that we have available to bypass censorship, you can get a very, very good profile of what Iranians like, what they are reading, and what there is a demand for. So finally, how am I doing on time, Jen? Okay, a couple minutes? All right. So in a very general way, you'll see some presentations that follow that where we can go into these issues a little bit more deeply. But beginning in 2022, I was asked to help the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to look at an overall internet strategy, which would include an internet freedom strategy for Iran. Those efforts continue. I think we owe a lot to Representative Barbara Lee and her staff for doing this on the House side. This needs continual attention, support, advocacy to make sure that we have a whole of government approach to responding to the next set of protests, which will inevitably come. We don't know when, but I think many groups in civil society have really learned their lesson, and they know how to play the game at this point. I don't think at all that the government in Iran can declare victory whatsoever. And secondly, really sustain funding and tech support for population level impacts, which you'll learn about a little bit later. And leverage these tech platforms to help bootstrap other technologies. Once you have success and you have a very large audience, it's much easier to take some of these new technologies and integrate them into these platforms. These can be done through APIs, application programming interfaces, or software development kits, rather than try to build an audience from zero. And in most cases probably not succeeding well. And then finally, I think we're also going to hear a little bit about sanctions. And I just wanted to mention that, having been the author of General License D1, that was really our first step into opening the aperture for information technologies to Iranians. That license was amended a few times. Now it has been expanded with General License D2, and there are some efforts underway to expand it even further. This really helps as well because it gives the technology platforms around the world some top cover that they will not be sanctioned themselves by helping the Iranian people. So with that, I hope I've stimulated more questions than I have answers, probably so, and I'll turn the program back over to Jim.
Thank you, Eric. We will go through the panel and then take your questions and answers. So be thinking and book those questions. When you do ask questions, you can designate a particular speaker you'd like to respond, or just leave it open to the panel. Again, I'm not going to go through everyone's biography. The people in this room, people speaking, are very well known, very well in the community and their expertise. But Nazanin is one of those critical figures, especially for somebody from outside and doing what we do. Tehan Life, if you aren't familiar with it, the English version, Persian version I don't know about, is one of those seminal, fundamental publications that has nuances and fact-based news. And it's the type of information that Eric was mentioning, that it is our duty and obligation to be able to allow Iranians to access and to use and to benefit from. She's had a long life as an activist, as an educator, as a cultural leader. Please look at her biography, and we look forward to listening to your comments. Would you prefer to stay
you
there?
will only see my glasses if I stand.
Okay.
I can try. Thank you so very much for that introduction, and it's a great honor and privilege to be here amongst you. Eric, you provided, the data and the information about internet and information technology. What I would like to do here is to provide you with context. And up until mid-1990s, the Islamic Republic really had a monopoly of access to information and news. In effect, when the revolution happened in Iran, for those of you who were not born then, but certainly I was a student here, and we experienced it firsthand, not only here, but we went through a cultural revolution. For over 2 years, universities were closed, the government was emptied from all technocrats educated in the West, and the leaders of the revolution, they wanted to create a new society. It was a society that its history began at the time of the revolution in 1979, as if there was no Iran before. They tried to erase the Persian culture, and what's important is when you read whether it's the Constitution or the press laws, you get a grasp of what is it that they were afraid of. Certainly the ministries of culture and information and communication, all media, everything was controlled. The press law, for example, when you look at the laws, over 20 lines included of those who were not accord, who did not have the right for their voices to be heard or their stories to be told. And these didn't only include previous regime officials, but rather journalists, anyone, it's explicitly stated in the press law, who had anything to do with communication, with information, and so a whole new generation was brought in. In particular, the preamble of the Constitution of the Islamic Republic states that the mass media must serve the diffusion of Islamic culture in pursuit of the Islamic Revolution, and that Article 4 declares that Islamic criteria applies absolutely and generally to all civil, penal, financial, economic, administrative, cultural, military, political laws and regulations. This also applies to, for example, women's rights when it comes to Article 21, where that all their rights have to be in conformity with Islamic culture. So, internet broke those shackles. Certainly, internet was introduced in Iran in the mid-1990s, and we do see that first it was introduced in universities, and a few years later, we see the uprisings of the student movement, the 1999 student movement. 2019 or 2022 were not the only times that suddenly the people have come to the streets. We've had from before it was, in the beginning there were coups from military coups that didn't take place, then it was 1988, but then 1999 you see the first expression of a society and the youth of wanting more. And so by 2005, there were 1 million internet users. 2008, we had 23 million internet users. And by that time, Iran had the highest growth of internet users in the Middle East. And after that date, 2009, we see 2009 Green Revolution. So today, the internet, I mean, a total of, we've got 69.83 million internet users. And the internet penetration is at nearly 80%. But as you, Eric, have noted, the regime has been trying to control it, whether it is through organizing own VPNs. The Iranians use VPNs. I mean, right now, Iran has the lowest kind of internet access. It is so weak that some people at some days, they have to use 20 different kind of VPNs to try to get information in. And this is simply because, it's also the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, is very much into the telecommunications industry as well. So when they don't like it, when there's situations, the VPNs don't work, they close down the internet, there's all the access to internet. So even we've got gamers. I mean, the gaming population in Iran is growing exponentially. And there have been times last year, for example, they were banned, some games were banned because the youth were using the back rooms to speak to one another and plan and coordinate. So it has been a cat and mouse game. But one thing that needs to be emphasized is that, at a time when all sectors of the population are grappling with an economic freefall, political isolation, social collapse, environmental degradation, and more than anything else, hopelessness and despair. And this is something the regime continuously wants to promote, hopelessness and despair, especially now amongst the opposition, but always that there is nothing you can do, that you have to deal with us and you have to obey us. But social media as a tool for change really changed the landscape of information and access to information in Iran. And in a way, it crippled the regime's propaganda and narrative formation machine. So Iranians using social media, especially from 2005, 2006, we see this growth of an identity, a new identity apart from the Islamic, quote unquote, Islamic Republic identity that has been used and fed into the society. So they learned about their historical roots through non-state media and entertainment outlets. And when they have there's no respect for fundamental human rights, when workers suffer from lack of welfare and security, property owners and investors are not guaranteed rights, the financial system and the government system is opaque, there are no impartial or arbitration rules, and the affairs of the state is not run by professionals, but by mafia-like political and economic entities. Iranians compare this period to what there was before the revolution, when Iran's economy was 26% larger than Turkey's, 65% higher than Korea's, and nearly 5 times that of Vietnam's. According to the Atlantic Council in 2017, Turkey's nominal GDP was 2.4 and Korea's 7.2 times larger than Iran's, while Vietnam's is 70% more than Iran's. So they are saying, hey, this is the Islamic identity, is not our identity. We are capable of having a better future if allowed that freedom. And that is something that you mentioned Kayhan Life, but the publication Kayhan London in London is very important in the sense that since it was, that it's, Kayhan's, our history goes back to 1942 in Iran, and it was the highest circulated publication in the Middle East, with magazines for youth, children, women, even its own College of Journalism, brought modern journalism into Iran. With the revolution, it was expropriated, and it was handed to the office of the Supreme Leader. So the original publisher and editors fled to London and established it in 1984 with the specific aim that Iranians deserve better, that they can bring this change themselves, and that the future is for them to build, not for the regime to tell them that to take them back to the archaic ages. So when we come to women, for example, we do not aspire, women do not aspire to a status and rights that we never had, just like across the Middle East. These are women in the Middle East have, obviously, they are more advanced as far as rights. They are getting more because their governments are opening doors for them. They have realized the potential of women. But in Iran, it has been the opposite. So social media helped women and girls understand that women were considered the equal of men during the Achaemenid period, that we were at the forefront of the constitutional revolution in 1906, which was inspired by Enlightenment and Age of Reason. That even though we achieved a lot, the success, it was the clerics who have always tried to hold us back. But the modernization of Iran in the 1960s brought a new dawn for women's rights. We received the right to vote and stand in elections. The Family Protection Law of 1967 and 75 was one of the most progressive in the region, and that we even had equal pay for equal work at the time when other countries did not have it. Or I remember here in 1977, 78, when I was studying and also working for women's groups here, ERA we were trying to bring ERA here, but in Iran, at that time, all decisions requiring cabinet approval had to be cleared for gender impact. So with the revolution, we became overnight second-class citizens. And the forced hijab that you see is just the tip of the iceberg. Our legal status is denigrated in the articles of the Civil Code, the Labor Law, and the Penal Code, which places the value of a woman's life at half of that of a man. And that, in effect, we are battling against a gender apartheid. So I will end by just giving you about women, a small, what is the employment rate of women at this juncture. Female unemployment is on the rise, and according to the Statistical Center of Iran, although there were 80,000 more women, more than men aged 15 in the labor force, the female participation is 14.1%, while the male's rate is 68.3%. Of the 31 million women aged 15 and over, only 3.3, that is 12%, are employed, compared to 20 million, 63.7% of the 32 million men. So the regime has reached a dead end. Its political, religious, security, economic, and social foundations are crumbling. Internet and the age of technology and information has brought in new understanding and a new identity for Iranians. And we hope that definitely there will be a next uprising. Things cannot go on as they are. And Iranians at home understand it. They do know that the world has been behind them, but they need more than symbolic action. They need real action. And certainly the United States was one that sort of changed its direction of policies after the Mahsa revolution, but then suddenly cold water was poured over us. And so messaging is important, access to information is important. And this is where the world can show Iranians at home and empower them to take their lives back into their own hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazanin. Your dedication, your life's commitment is truly impressive and such a value add to the Iranian community inside and worldwide. Lily, who everyone here knows, her and her family, also has a life dedicated to the Iranian people and to gender rights. Indeed, I think her work in supporting gender rights globally is well known, in addition to being the foremost gender rights activist and expert for Iran. As someone who has implemented gender rights programming in Iran going back 15 years, her work is crucial. It is a very rich story of her personal life, her education, and her experiences. But I am going to ask her to pick up on a comment that Nazanin mentioned that, frankly, I think it deserves a little more attention. Is the regime crumbling? What is the future? Is there an end? I think those were comments that the regime can't go on. And the status of women, well, let me rephrase that. We are a year into the Mahsa anniversary, coming up with the anniversary, but we are decades into post-revolution. We are decades into supporting gender rights. It is very fulfilling for those of us on the technical side to see women take their place in the front lines and lead the opposition to this regime, just as women were the determining and leading factor in places like Syria and other places in the region. So Lily, what has changed? Are those changes persistent? Right now, today, there are new chastity and gender rights and laws, restrictions on hijab are being considered right now in Tehran. Yes, we see more people, more women that are freer on the streets. Can you take your expertise and talk about where we are today, where we are going, what are the trends, and then what can people like those in this room do to help sustain and to realize Nazanin's projection of an end to the repression?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for a very generous introduction. It's an honor to be here, and a specific thanks to the organizers. They work so hard, I know that, and it's not easy to have such a panel. I really appreciate it. Also, I want to start with honoring the memory of all those, first of all, Mahsa, Jina, Amini, and all those innocent lives that not only we lost them during the past 1 year, but also during the past 44 years. All of those who've been detained or forced to be exiled, tortured, forced confessions. So I really honor every single life journey and experience during the past 44 years. To respond to the question that you asked, I try to be very brief in order. I love the question and answer normally, but I fast forward to last year, September 16, 2022. I think it was the new era in the Iranian history and the fight for the democracy. Jina was not the first innocent who was murdered at the hands of the regime, and as we saw, she was not the last one. But what had happened with Jina's murder, I think it's important to emphasize on a few points that we get to where we want to go, that what should we do now. Basically, the regime survived on terror, arrest, execution, torture, detention, whatever, name it, for the past 44 years. And what they survived on was the isolation, isolating the society, fraction, and making division in the society. I have a few examples. Men against women, ethnics against non-ethnics, Muslims against non-Muslims, older generation against younger generation, Iranian inside Iran against Iranian in the diaspora. And the last important thing that as an activist and a family of the active, parents, basically, I experienced myself, activists against ordinary people. So whoever had the badge or the label of political activist or human rights activist or women's rights activist, we've been in silo. Like, we've been pushed to the corner of isolation, and everybody else in the society been ordinary people that they were minding their own business, day-to-day business, basically, and it was a stigma to get close to us. As a child, I didn't have a friend at the school. Everybody been scared of me and my family. As a child who my dad been detained, I could not share it with anyone. I was telling them that he's in hospital, he's dead, he's traveling, he's at war, because I would have lost a few friends even that I had. So what has happened on September 16, all those gaps was breached, basically. Mahsa was a Kurdish young woman, quote-unquote ordinary family, basically, that all Iranian people, like, I could have been Mahsa, Mahsa could have been me. She could have been my sister, my mother, my daughter, my neighbor. And also she could bridge the gaps between men and women, because Mahsa could have been any Iranian man's daughter, basically. And that's how the fraction and the division that the regime lived on for the past 44 years was broken. All of a sudden, the whole society felt they want the same thing. The Women's Life Freedom Revolution Uprising had that message with a clear demand. No to the Islamic Republic, and that never happened. What Nazanin mentioned about all the historical movement, there was about, there was targeted, basically. It was the student movement, green movement, reform movement. But this one was progressively asking for the regime change. Since then, world also witnessed a new mature civil society of Iran, which was not visible. So woman life freedom did not happen overnight. It was generation after generation that women's rights activists, human rights activists, they were building the capacity, but at the right time and right place, it showed, its capacity. And everybody been shocked with the level of smartness, goal-oriented, and courageous that, ordinary people in Iran showed in the past 1 year. Also, the Iranian people smartly and very creatively asked for the support from the international community that we are sitting here and today. So they asked for the international human rights organization, UN also, at any level, to support them, to acknowledge them, to acknowledge what they want. They showed to the world that they need the support, but they want to make the decision on their own. They are smart enough, they are mature enough to, and pay the price, but they need the support, they cannot do it alone. As a Canadian, Iranian Canadian, I want to share a story with you. During the Green Movement, a few of us, active members of the community, we could meet with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. At that point, we developed a letter of the demands that what we want to support Iranian inside Iran and Iranian Canadian in Canada. Believe or not, those demands, probably it was 5 of them. Still last year, we had the meeting with the current Foreign Affairs Minister, still was the same demands. Nobody paid attention. We were asking for no negotiation, behind the door, in the back hallway, under the table, shaking hands, with the murderer, basically. But we know that it is happening, and the civil society inside Iran is witnessing, and that is exactly what makes them weaker and weaker. If we want them to have the strength, the Western government has to avoid it. The other one was targeted sanctions, and I know U.S. situation is different, but generally speaking, we told the Canadian government that Canada becomes the safe haven for the murderers. It is. I live in Toronto, and I wrote an article in Toronto Star 6 months ago, and for the first time I spoke about it, that the chief of the police, Tehran's police, Sardar Talai, General Talai, who was the head of the team which responsible of my dad's torture, and I have my dad's voice recorded talking about him. Do you know where he was? At the same local gym that I'm going. At the same local gym. And his picture was, published everywhere. So how safe we are, even as activists, Iranian in the diaspora, activists basically, how safe we have to feel to be able to support Iranian people inside Iran is also the matter. Targeted sanction not only not to allow the murderer to come to the Western countries, but also remove them, being able to remove them, those ones who are here and investing, money in these countries, remove them from the land. Iranian people, those ones who lost the loved ones, they are asking for justice. Again, coming from Canada and losing 176 innocent people on the flight PS 752. We lost a few kids from the same school that my child is going. We know the meaning of justice. Supporting the NGOs, the organizations which are working toward documentation, fact-finding, to be able to prepare, to prepare and advocate for the international, justice. That's a big, big support for Iranian. Then they feel that at least their voice is not going to be lost, and there will be justice one day. So, be their voice. Support activists inside, outside Iran, by supporting the organizations, NGOs, foundations, which are supporting the civil society inside Iran. We know that the woman's life freedom didn't happen overnight. So who was bridging the gap between the Western countries, Western society, the activists outside Iran, and being in touch with the people inside Iran? Well, they are taking risks, but we know that they've been taking that risk. So still support those NGOs, those human rights organizations, the foundations. And also staying at the right side of the history is a matter now. Social media, internet, policies that policymakers needs to be aware of all those little small things that can change significantly the situation of individuals in Iran. Also, there was one more thing that I wanted to mention, and I totally forgot now, but if I remember, I will media. Iranian people also feel that when they are on the street and they are sacrificing, media covers everything. But after that, they go to the silence. So we have to be careful that, throughout the year, we be able to highlight the Iranian movement, the women's life movement, Iranian women at the forefront of the movement, in different occasions, if it's International Women's Day, if it's, in whatever occasion we highlight them. And I promise you at the end that if the Islamic regime, if be removed from the history from right now, not only Iran will be a better place for Iranian, but the world will be a better place to live. Woman, life, freedom, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Please raise your hand. I'll mark you down. If you have questions, again, make your questions as direct as possible. Don't hide comments and questions. But I'm going to take advantage of being up here to start the discussion off. I'd like to follow up with each of the presentations and again try to move it forward. We're all well aware of the repressive nature, the activities of this regime, and we all hope for a better life for Iranians, and appreciative of the people that have, like the three here, that have dedicated their life, or a good portion of their life, to bettering the rights and the freedoms of the Iranians, which is indeed reflective of the world's conditions. So following up on that, going to be a little more direct. And this is going to go for all the speakers, but so feel free to address them. Lily, you mentioned support. Nazanin mentioned support, international support. We have to have international support. We have to have attention. But frankly, the criticism of the Iranian diaspora community is they're not engaged. What specifically support? Asking, demanding. When you say NGOs, as an NGO, as an implementer, I'm constantly asking activists, what can we do to help? Putting aside the funding question, right? Because there is money available. What can we do to help? Nazanin and Eric mentioned pretty much the topic of the day, internet access to news, uncensored, unfettered news and information. It's critical in today's world more than anywhere else. Comparatively, Iran has significant internet penetration. It has a sophisticated society. It has an educated society. And you're going to hear a little bit more about the technical aspects and about this access and what is being done on the second panel by someone who's a critical player in this world and has access to millions of people. But Nazanin, what, going forward, given where we are today, what specifically do we need to do, not only to expand and to make access easier, but there's a lot of critics that will say, so what? People have been in the streets. They know about the issues. What does access to information, what does it mean going forward? And are there, from inside, and from access to your publications, is it persistent, is it going, what's the trajectory? And similar vein, Eric, you mentioned 90.5 million dollars for global internet freedom. The Iranian internet freedom budget has steadily grown, I would argue incrementally, less than incremental increase. But is money the issue? We hear constantly the one tangible issues for people in this town is, hey, let's throw more money at internet freedom. Is that the panacea? Is that going to put us on the road to the crumbling that Nazanin mentioned? What specifically can the U.S. government do differently other than just throw money at the issue? What is our effort that would take into account the lessons learned for the Internet Freedom Program that you've been involved with for decades? Maybe we should start with Nazanin on the right and go down the...
Well, the most important thing about access to information is also allowing activists inside to be able to communicate and coordinate with one another. And certainly, one thing that the internet has done is that, there is no longer, a separation between Iranians outside and those inside. The regime, definitely one of its strategies is to divide and rule. And certainly this is something that we saw after Mahsa's revolution, that in the period that followed, there were a lot of bots, a lot of accounts that they tried to, mimic, certain activists or certain groups, and to bring in, again, more despair and division. Certainly, there should be this awareness, number one. Also, the messaging that countries around the world send, what the Islamic Republic has always done throughout the years, is trying to buy itself legitimacy at home by appearing on the international stage, by shaking hands of foreign diplomats, whether it's at the EU or whether certainly we have Mr. Raisi right now, will be attending the session at the UN. And one of the messages, they are so audacious that they're inviting opinion makers and media to a dialogue of interfaith dialogue. This is an interfaith dialogue at the time when Baha'is are being persecuted inside, their schools are being closed, Christians are not able to gather, and they are being persecuted. Even dervishes, Sufis, are being persecuted. And they have the audacity to come outside and promote an interfaith dialogue, or go and get international stage to promote this. They're doing for their own propaganda purposes. Mr. Raisi has not even graduated from high school. He failed elementary school, so he ended up in Rome. And now he's trying to project an image that, yes, world leaders, I would have been able to secure $90 billion here, $60 billion there. It's this whole strategy of terrorism paying is working to their advantage. The most important thing is stop doing this. Stop feeding into their propaganda. And they're saying, yes, we can persecute. I mean, there were more women executed last year than men in Iran. This is the only place in the world more women were executed. Women are under, tremendous pressure. Not only that, minorities, the Baluchis, the Arabs, they're being looked at not as citizens of Iran, but as security concerns for the country. And yet, the diplomats, Islamic Republic diplomats are coming outside and gaining a world stage. Stop that. Number two, social media. I mean, Instagram, not only they are blocked, Facebook, Instagram, so WhatsApp at different stages in Iran, but even within Instagram, there is discrimination between activists. We are shadow banned. Our accounts were taken off without any kind of explanation. But on Twitter, Mr. Khamenei has his Twitter account. They're using platforms outside to promote their propaganda, whereas those of us who don't have so much backing, we're at a, we are on the back foot. So it's messaging and it's important policies and understand calling a spade and not giving them life. Thank you.
Eric, beyond messaging, what should we be doing? What do we need to be doing? What can we do better? And what have we learned?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. There's no real simple answer. At the current level of funding of $90.5 million for all global internet freedom, of which Iran is a subset of that, the U.S. government does not reveal the actual percentage of that number that goes to Iranian programming. But it has been going up. But at 90.5, that is just enough to buy one F-35 fighter from Lockheed Martin. So, is the price tag really expensive? You could probably do better. But you could also take that top line of money and spend it more smartly. Because I can tell you, when the people start pouring out into the streets and they start really exercising social media, they need sustained, continual, active support. And if that is not forthcoming, this is not something that you can just control like a dial. Today we want to go easy on the regime, tomorrow we don't. It has to be sustained, and that does not come without a price. It is not a free good. It takes talent and resources and expenses for network operations to sustain. Unfortunately, the mechanisms that we have to support things in such a sustained fashion are not really there. And so if we were to reform anything, I would say, yes, you need a whole of government strategy, and that needs to, and we need to be prepared for the next round of civil disorders.
That demand for a whole of government strategy for global internet freedom, but specifically Iran country program.
Correct.
Something that a lot of practitioners, legislators talk about. Just my own point of view, something that the Iranian American community should take up rather than just focusing on the funding. Eric, let me push you one last time before we get to Lily. Very bluntly, there's going to be more demonstrations. There's going to be another round of dissensions. There's going to be major circumvention events. There's going to be more sophisticated measures and countermeasures. And they're going to shut off the internet for 5 minutes, for days. Are we prepared? Is there an emergency response mechanism? Are the technologies available? Are the distribution systems available? What's going to happen next round?
Yeah, I hate to offer predictions because things can they can turn into a very fluid situation very quickly. Let me just try to respond to the main points. I think first of all, yes, there are organizations that are prepared to respond, but they generally need surge-type funding in order to, the last thing in the world you want to do in the name of internet freedom is to throttle traffic because you can't pay for the network costs, right? That's a very, very counterproductive situation. That's kind of, number one. Number two, I think there needs to be an improved mechanism to coordinate these platforms and also with the content providers to make sure that they're being properly supported. There are also technologies that even in an internet shutdown or partial shutdown scenario, that you know, as you know, Curtis LeMay said, some of the bombers are always going to get through, right? And that is true of the internet as well. Some of that traffic is always going to get through. And you know, we've demonstrated this empirically in the study that we did in the 2019 shutdown, you know, where we found, you know, I don't want to go into much detail, but there were survivor services taking place that, you know, the government felt that they couldn't engage in a 100% shutdown simply because they would be destroying their own economy. So, you know, even though, you know, I would say that in the case of mobile, smartphone services, data cellular, the government has gotten increasingly sophisticated in shutting down certain cities or certain regions. And you need to be prepared to deal with that. There are ways of doing it, but there are still substantial obstacles.
Thank you, Eric. We get to Lily. We have a couple of questions. Maybe we could take them and you could fold them into your remarks. Jamie and Faye. Jamie, do you want to start?
Sure. Hey, my name's Jamie Nelson. I used to be a congressional staffer here. Years ago, I lived out in Seattle, just do international development work.
Back in the day.
Back in the day, yeah. So since this is a congressional briefing, like specifically what, let's say before the end of the year in December, like what are the things that Congress could actually do for a staffer in the room that's taken time out to come here and listen to you? The background you guys have laid beautifully. I think, you know, Eric, you mentioned the unanimous support that Congress has given to resolutions in the past, and that's great. You know, it's sort of a two-part question. So what could a congressional staffer tell their member based on what you guys are presenting today is a solid step that they could take forward? And besides Representative Lee, what other support do you have here on the Hill that could do something concrete from the framework of congressional action, probably before the end of the year? Next year, obviously, is going to be a pretty intense domestic political year here in the U.S. It's going to distract a lot of the attention of policymakers from important issues like this. So I'd leave that to anyone, but just specifically kind of what can a congressional staffer do based off of what you're talking about today?
Very critical question. Faye?
You have 5 more minutes.
Oh. Don't hide your questions and comments. So, Lily, we go to you, and then Jamie's question, which is pretty much the topic of the objective of today's event. Maybe we can come back and circle back to Nazanin and Eric for last comments.
Sure. Absolutely. I just wrote down a few keywords to answer the question, basically, if I can, because again, like, legislation is one thing, but the community challenges in a very diverse community. Also, you mentioned about the diaspora community. For us, let's be very frank and blunt that in the past year specifically, we had a journey as Iranian in the diaspora too, with raising hope, losing hope, blaming ourselves, feeling, you know, we failed it. All those journeys, you know, are valid, and I think it's part of the democratic practice that we rarely have inside Iran, and even outside Iran. I think the regime been very successful even to divide us as right, left, you know, reformists, non-reformists. So we are practicing. It may take time. So bear with us if you cannot get, you know, the answer from one group or two groups. Basically, that's part of the reality. But also, I'm not a technical person, but I think the movements in Iran since the Green Movement was built on internet and then later social media. I'm happy to hear that you guys have the funding here in the state. We don't in Canada. So that's a big advantage that you guys have. And also, I think what I was telling about the documentation, I want just to turn the lens again from a victim, survivor, and also now, like in the diaspora, as an activist who was working in human rights documentation for a while, basically. Like as a person who lived inside Iran, there was no internet at that point, but a little bit of support that we were hearing, or we could see that the international society is giving us, even if it's through the Amnesty International, even if it was through the UN, if it was through the media, it was a new blood. It was a new blood to the society, to the activists, that, oh, we are seen, we are not alone. So it's even like magnified now, basically, with internet and social media, that how much when they are in the prison, they need to see that, you know, the international community, US, is making the regime accountable. For any execution, you know, they are more pushed into isolation, basically. So how that works and translates to the legislation, I'm not the right person to talk about it, but these are the things that I think it helps the civil society. Also, from this side of the table, as a human rights activist, the journey, again, I go back to the flight PS752, that the process and the journey, the painful journey of the documentation, which the families walked alone. Do not leave the victim and victim families alone. They paid from their own pocket during the hard grief that they had to make those documentation happen, to take it to the international court, human rights court, basically. So walking along with the victim and the families who are looking and seeking justice, I think is essential, and I think it can happen through legislation somehow, with allocating, you know, different funding to the process, basically. I don't know if I could elaborate, but these are like two lenses that I have, which I feel that, you know, it can empower the civil society in a very meaningful way. The organizations that they have a way to connect with the grassroots society. Those are the keys.
Thank you, Lily. Just a personal shout out to the Canadian government. My organization has implemented a couple different gender rights programs in Iran that were funded by the Canadian government that were very forward-looking, including training them gender rights activists and lawyers on international law, and using international law to protect women against the regime. The Canadian government always came back and says, okay, what do we do next? And to that, it's to their credit, they do have a very sophisticated Iranian assistance program, our neighbors to the north. Nazanin, and then we'll close where we started with Eric.
Certainly there is the Mahsa Act right now. The best thing is to have it passed and implemented. Symbolic actions mean a lot. Again, the position, the way that Mrs. Biden handed in, you know, the Grammy Award to the song Baraye, and then suddenly, just a few months later, you know, we hear that, you know, it works, terrorism pays, so the funds are being returned back to the Islamic Republic, and Mr. Raisi has the audacity to say that we will use it the way we want to. And past experience has showed that all these funds that go back to them, they are not used for the purposes of bringing fundamental change, better standards of living, but lining the pockets of the mafia, the inside mafia, or ending up with IRGC, or buying bullets, to be spent elsewhere, whether in Lebanon or elsewhere in the Middle East. There's this recognition, has to be recognized, that this regime, they lack the mind and the purpose to be able to govern in a modern, in a modern environment. They are there for their own survival, and this has to be recognized. And terrorism should not pay. It started in 1978, after Lebanon with, I started my journalism career with the hostages in Lebanon, the bombings, of the barracks in Lebanon, and it has continued. Terrorism has paid. Put an end to that policy, and also help connect, keep Iranians connected to one another. That's the most important thing, because where the regime brings divisiveness and despair, the messaging should be for hope that they can, and they have the world on their side. Not through symbolism, but through action. 90 million, and you don't know what percentage goes to Iran. The Iranian cyber army has budgets for billions, the cyber army. So let's be realistic as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazanin. And before we close, just to make Eric's a challenge a little more difficult, Elise, you have the last question.
I would just love to flesh that out, because I mean, I was watching the interview yesterday with the president, and he was saying, oh, the Iranians will do whatever they want with it. Well, the truth is they can't really. I mean, the money is has very strict provisions that are going to be governed outside of Iran. So I mean, isn't that a little bit of kind of just for domestic consumption, that, oh, we can do whatever we want with the money? The truth is that they can't. So I mean, are these type of, I understand if you just give Iran $6 billion and they could do whatever they want, they'll use it to fund terrorism, they'll use it for the army, they'll use it for the IRGC. I mean, that's clear. But aren't these type of things where the U.S. kind of, or the international community has much more of a hands-on approach on where the money is going? Isn't that a better way of dealing with it and also helping the Iranian people? I mean, that $6 billion is not going wherever Iran wants it, that's all.
The problem is, we're getting more information from inside Iran than what outside, the State Department, or all the information nowadays is coming from inside Iran. So if that's not so, we need more information, more messaging, break that propaganda cycle. That's the thing to do it. Let the Iranians know that this money, they cannot be used. They're using it for their own propaganda purposes. More information.
Yeah, in response to that, I mean, it doesn't mean that sanctions have just gone away. On the other hand, if you were to ask me, would the Iranians, after getting that money, use it to cheat, or to divert funds? And that's true, as you rightly point out. Would it be better if the internet freedom community had $6 billion instead of 90 million? I can't say no to that, but how would we spend $6 billion if we had it?
That's for the next month.
Yeah, maybe the next round, pay us rather than them, I guess would be an answer. But I'm not sure that we could swallow even double the budget, unless we have the proper programming resources and infrastructure and the right kinds of implementers and the right priorities. So, I'm one to say that, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to, say that we're getting enough funds, but we can also spend the funds that we get in a lot more effective ways than we are.
Do you want to just conclude with a more direct answer to Jamie's question of what Congress should be doing? What would you tell them to do?
Well, I would want a much more well-articulated and directed strategy that's tightly coupled to American foreign policy objectives. I think that's, number one. And that includes not only the official messaging that the U.S. does through Persian News Network and Radio Farda and other avenues, but also to give increased articulated support to the diaspora as well as to Iranian voices inside Iran. I think that only serves to put additional pressure on the regime. It shows that civil society can survive and even thrive in these environments, and it will continue to contract the level of support that the regime has.
I think we're over time. We want to take one more quick question. Is that
No,
very quick? Okay.
I'll ask
Grab
you.
the speakers during the coffee break. Thank you very much. I think we raised a lot of questions. I don't know how much we solved. This is an ongoing fight. I think there are some very pertinent discussion points, especially for the Iranian community in the diaspora. Eric's comments about, hey, we can do things better. We can take some lessons learned. Are we prepared for the future? Oh, I'm sorry. We take that into the next session. As an implementer, I'll just give a little personal perspective, and this is what we want from the Iranians. Tell us specifically what we can do, what we should do. It's not just a matter of money, but how we can help. How we can help empower the people inside and outside in this fight. And frankly, that has not been fully answered. Thank you. Sorry. 5-minute break. Faye says 3 minutes. We're giving you 5 minutes. We'll come back.
Let's go to our next panel. We have Mike Hall, Mike Kazemi, did I say it right? Yes. Shaheen Sajid
Just go with the last name,
Milani. I want to be able to say it right because I speak about 11 words of Farsi, and so this would have been really great for me. And Alex. I think we're going to start with Mike, who has some interesting information, and Mike will start.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
I'll just jump up here.
Yeah, we're each going to take each of the speakers is going to take about 5 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion, and then we'll go to your questions.
Thank you so much. My name is Michael Hull. I'm the president of co-founders of Saifon. We've been supporting the Iranian people since 2008 when we.
You can't. Is your microphone on?
There we are. Okay. We've been supporting the Iranian people since 2008 by providing internet access to them throughout the time period with this evolution of the internet as it's been going on. As we all know, mobile devices have become the way that people are able to stay connected to the world and to themselves. And as a result, we've been moving our software along so that we can support the people. And this, in this 1 year time period that we've been looking at, we did see, an example of seeing how the Iranian people can take matters into their own hands. This is something that is absolutely critical to the way that you can affect change within a country, which by having the actual people themselves take the time to opt in and say, hey, you know what, if you're going to filter our internet, we're going to utilize tools such as Saifon and other VPNs that are used to give people access to information in these critical times. Now, often you'll wonder, well, what's the point of all this? And I think that this, in the run-up to the very beginning of the protests, is a really good example of how effective having the population scale response to these sorts of major blocking events can really affect how not only the international community sees things, but also how the government themselves within Iran can react to these, to the fact that all the people are now responding. There's another factor in all this when you see these sorts of events that occur, and I'm just going to run through some quick numbers, but just to give you a high-level thing, we basically saw within from the beginning from the end of September until no more than 2 months later, we went from having about 1 million people a day using our tool to access the open and free internet to almost 10 million, 9.7 million people a day. So this kind of tenfold increase is also a really good indication of a return on investment, if you're looking at it from that point of view, in terms of the money that is spent. Eric Novotny mentioned that $90 million this year. You know, when we started, it was 14, 15 million. And so the fact that Congress is stepping into this at a bipartisan manner, not only from voting, but also from actual funding, as well as funding different agencies, has really resulted in the kind of a tool for Iranian people to be able to use to actually, you know, push back against their government to say, hey, you know, this is not, we're going to make our own decisions on how these things work. And as you see in this graph here, this is a graph that's been annotated, and those blue dashed lines mark events that occurred that with each of those events, you'll see an increase in the use of Siphon in this particular case, and other tools as well. Now, Siphon is a general purpose tool, so it's used for everything from accessing social media to also used for communication platforms such as WhatsApp and other Telegram and that kind of thing that are used to allow people while they're on their phones to be able to communicate and connect with each other. The filtering systems that are in place are very just-in-time systems, and they're very sophisticated. So in the case of Siphon, not only are we able to respond to these demands of the demand and increased demand from the people, but we're also able to provide a service that it allows them to keep keeping the pressure up on their government to make sure that everybody is acting in a manner that is consistent with the way the population would like to see it. Now, one of the questions that can come out of this is, well, how does this possible? Well, Siphon's very good at staying sort of, I call it hiding in plain sight, and as a result, this is just to kind of give you another example of how do you go from 1 million to 10 million? Well, part of that is that over the last 10 years, we have been supporting the people of Iran, and this is a slide from a redacted study by Pilar Systems inside the country, both telephone and online survey. And this is a very important thing because it goes to show how here's Siphon at the very top of that list on both the things, and yet we are a open source tool. We are not, and these other ones are all closed source tools and not necessarily looking out for the best interests of the Iranian people. And I think that this is a really good example of how this sort of approach not only affects change over a decade, but also we're there and ready to go, and the Iranian people know about us, and when something comes up, they know to go to Siphon and click start and get going. Another thing that so I just wanted to kind of give a little background on how that happens. It's not just people find out about something in a minute. It's a long-term commitment. This long-term commitment by the Congress and the U.S. government in general has been affected through all the agencies in the State Department that are so critical to this. I just have to put a tip of the hat to the amazing capability of the people that are running these grants programs to be able to move relatively quickly, considering it's the U.S. government, and we all know how difficult governments around the world can have in pivoting on things. So there is a very well-established program here, but what's coming out of this is that sometimes when these things happen, and it's not just in Iran, but people will come pouring into our network, and these networks are not free to run. They're all running on top of commercial networks. And so I did want to mention that one of the things that can be done here is a coordinated effort to make sure that when a world event occurs, and in this case, in the case of Iranian people, we were pushing a ton of data. And that all costs money, and these programs need to have the capability to turn on the dial for these things, for us and other tools. Now, the last thing I want to kind of mention here as well is that why is all this important? Well, it's important because you need to get information in and out of the country during these critical times. And one of these things, Eric had also mentioned the Gaman survey. And so, you can also ask the people of Iran how they feel about things. And in this case, I just wanted to mention as well that Siphon and Lantern, the other tool that's supported through U.S. funding, were made up the majority of the way that people could actually encounter surveys and actually be reaching them. Instagram, Telegram, and Twitter and all that, all billions and billions of dollar companies. And here's a couple grants programs, and they're able to ask Iranians questions and get feedback on what it is that's important to them, so that we can take that back to funders and let them know, and stakeholders what's important. So I just wanted to, that's my final wrap up on that, and I'm more than happy to I was hoping to have like a little bit more of a show some live stuff, but I just wanted to kind of lay that out there, and I'll pass it over to the panel again. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, Alex, let's talk a little bit about the poll.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. I'm gonna get up here.
Yeah.
So I can. Okay, go. This is your laptop? Oh yeah. All right, everybody. Good morning again. I'm Alex Mahajer. I'm the Vice President of the Iranian American Democrats of California, and this morning I'd like to discuss some poll results that we, from a poll we conducted of Iranian American voters in the state of California. So as a result of the outpouring of engagement of Iranians in the diaspora, it became evident that there are many competing groups and interests vying for the attention of elected officials and policymakers with prescribed policy solutions and foreign policy stances. The Iranian American Democrats of California is also aware that not all of these prescribed solutions are in the best interest of the Iranian people and have self-serving and political motives. Prime among these problematic viewpoints is a recent push to validate Maryam Rajavi as a viable opposition leader. She is the self-proclaimed leader of Mojahedin Khalq, which is known by many different names, MEK, NCRI, IAOC, and several other names. And there is an orchestrated attempt to raise her profile through House Resolution 100, which has regretfully received supermajority bipartisan support from 238 members of Congress. Therefore, IADC coordinated a community-based fundraising to conduct the first ever poll of Iranian American voters in California. It is clear from the result of the new poll that the MEK and any organization related to Maryam Rajavi enjoy virtually no support from Iranian American voters in California, and any effort to acknowledge her as the future president of Iran is absolutely not aligned with the voices of Iranian people. As such, today we aim to cut through the noise and bring you the perspective of the actual Iranian American electorate and clear up some confusion about how to best move forward around our shared interests. So, the poll was conducted by with a population of Iranian American voters across the state of California. They were used to determine the sample, which was stratified in accordance of gender, region, age, and political affiliation. Over 60,000 people received the poll, and the result of the summarized when the target sample size was met. Go to the next slide. Some of the demographics that we learned by polling Iranian Americans. What stands out immediately is that predominantly voters identified as being liberal. 90% of the respondents have familial ties in Iran. The community is also highly educated, with 71% having either college or postgraduate degree. And you can see we've summarized a little bit of the geographic region, liberal, moderate, conservative bent, how the community split up amongst political ideology, and then even party registration. And what I think is very interesting is that nearly a quarter of the respondents reported having no political affiliation to a party. And I think that's very important as we examine the voting bloc moving forward. So let's go to this next slide, please. This slide shows the crosstab between the voters' political affiliation based on their voter file versus how they identify themselves as liberal, moderate, or conservative. 24% of the Iranian American community in California have no allegiance to any of the political parties, and it is true across all three ideological spectrums. Next slide, please. This is a slide, summary of the slides to come, so if you are interested in seeing some more of these details, you can visit our website, iraniandems.org, and we'll have these summarized for you. But I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. The majority of the community are not able to pick between domestic and foreign affairs as drivers of their voting pattern. This is true across nearly every data set, whether gender, age, region, or political affiliation. The top 3 domestic issues are economy and jobs, healthcare, and gun control. Followed closely behind within the margin of error are Iranian American voters care about climate change, taxes, and housing and homelessness. Iranian American voters in California have demonstrated that they have their own set of priorities that don't always align with California voters at large. For instance, while the economy is similarly the top concern, healthcare is number 2 for this community compared to 9th for the totality of all California voters. When it comes to U.S. policy regarding Iran, the Iranian American community in California are clear, overwhelmingly, that they desire the promotion of regime change in Iran and human rights in Iran. This means the community expects that human rights is always an important element of foreign policy. They are also clear not to release funds to the Iranian regime, keeping the IRGC on the terrorist list, and support opposition leaders with effective mobilization and support from the people of Iran, and to avoid any military action by the United States. When it comes to immigration reform, Iranian American voters would like to have an easier way to obtain a visitation visa. This is why organizations like the Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans and the Iranian American Democrats of California are strongly supporting the Temporary Family Visitation Act, or the TFVA, which creates a new B3 non-immigration visa category, specifically allowing for family members of the U.S. citizens and permanent residents to temporarily visit their relatives in the U.S. We urge policymakers to show their support and vote to enact this bill. Iranian American voters have an easier time selecting which organizations they do not support versus those they are aligned with. As mentioned earlier, Iranian Americans oppose any organization affiliated with Maryam Rajabi. For non-Iranian organizations, the NRA has the most opposition. The majority of the community favors developing a new comprehensive policy towards Iran, which provides support to the pro-democracy movement by providing free high-speed internet and enforcing targeted sanctions on the Islamic regime. The community recognizes the threat of a nuclear Iran and understands the need for diplomatic dialogue, but with no concessions to the regime, and candidates or elected officials that support normalization of relations with the regime will receive unfavorable votes. The message is clear. The Iranian American voters of California believe the Islamic regime must go, and they cannot be a party of negotiation in good faith. The community has a strong aspiration for a secular democracy to replace the current theocracy in Iran. That is the overwhelming theme that emerged from multiple points in this poll. And we want to remind you of our mantra, not about us, without us. We want to encourage you to please reach out to your trusted sources when pressured by special interest groups like the NCRI and the OAIC. As a human rights activist and famous actress, Nazanin Boniadi recently said, "We would be wise to heed the words of the founder of the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, as we stand with the Iranian people in opposition to the Islamic Republic." Quote, "Diversity in council, unity in command. It is the only way we will overcome tyranny." And I look forward to taking some questions during our panel session.
Thank you, Alex. We have Shaheen. Maybe we'll go next, yes?
All right.
We're talking, well, actually, Shaheen, I think, actually that's a good way of segueing. Shaheen of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center is going to speak about the Islamic Republic's legitimacy and just the whole idea of negotiating with the regime being counterproductive. Shaheen has an excellent article in The Atlantic which I'm sure is on the website. Are we going to put that on the website? So yeah. Okay, go ahead, Shaheen.
Sure. First, thank you for inviting me. I'm going to just speak bluntly about what's going on. Basically, we need to explicitly state that the Iranian government is illegitimate. It doesn't enjoy popular support, it's undemocratic, it's theocracy, it's illegitimate, it must go. And we need to hear that statement being explicitly stated by US officials. You know, it might not be in their political interest, but that's something that I believe Iran will want. You know, you always hear in the media a particular narrative about the protest, that maybe it's about economic discontent, maybe it's about compulsory hijab. But no, I mean, those are issues that people care about, but they go out, they risk their lives because they want the regime to go. And that's very clear. But there is this, you know, real disconnect between the messaging that we're getting from the administration. You may not be familiar with it or not, but the US government has this Persian Twitter account, I think, which is also on Instagram. It's called USA by Farsi. And you can't believe how out of touch this account is. You know, it suddenly, it doesn't cover what's going on in Iran, but instead, this account you know, provides quotes by Secretary of State Blinken, for example, talking about platitudes. Women's rights are important, and they use some, you know, fancy font. You know, they put it on italics as if, you know, it is some great breakthrough statement. But it's ridiculous. But or you know, it talks about issues that pertain to the U.S. domestic life, while its audience are Iranians inside Iran who are under intense pressure by this regime. They're being killed. They go online, and on Twitter, the U.S. government account is talking about some platitudes, some obvious statements. Women's rights are important. This, you know, it doesn't make any sense to me that you know, why the U.S. government administration is talking this way. Maybe it's because they don't want to offend the regime while they want to make this nuclear deal, but still, it's too much to sacrifice on the altar of a nuclear agreement with Iran. At this stage, I don't think negotiating with this regime is something that is advisable, and it makes Iranians really angry. It makes Iranian Americans angry, as the poll that you know, you just discussed showed. But even if, you know, that's in the U.S. interest, still it doesn't make any sense to shy away from talking directly about human rights. For example, Salman Rushdie was assassinated a while back. I mean, he wasn't killed, but he was injured. Yeah, he lost his eyesight in one eye. And President Biden issued a statement, but he didn't actually talk about the Khomeini's fatwa that had basically motivated this person to attack Salman Rushdie in New York. You know, they just talk about it as if it's just some random act. But no, I mean, there's a standing fatwa by Khomeini against Salman Rushdie. And this must be directly talked about. It must be explicitly stated that, you know, this is a result of this regime that engages in terrorism. So, you know, that's on the part of the current administration, but the Republicans aren't much better either. As it was just mentioned right before, this resolution that House Resolution 100, I was going to talk about it. I didn't know you were going to talk about it too, but 239 members of the House signed on a statement that mentioned Maryam Rajavi as a plausible opposition leader. Now, that doesn't change the reality on the ground. Ms. Rajavi is highly unpopular, but it just shows that the US government is unserious. If it were serious about democracy, it would stay away miles from that group, which is one thing that I would say like 99% of Iranians agree that that group is just unacceptable. So when the majority of House members support that group, it's really bizarre, and it sends this message to Iranian people that the US government isn't really serious about democracy and regime change. Because if it was, it wouldn't support that particular group. And I also want to mention that in the recent deal that was supposedly made over hostages, 2 US green card holders were excluded, Jamshid Sharmah and Mr. Dalili, and that it really boggles my mind. Why would the US not get those people out while they're negotiating with the regime? And President Biden didn't even mention Iran in his State of the Union. To me, what I get is that, again, the US government, both in the House, in Congress, and in the White House, is not really serious about democracy in Iran, and that must change. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mike, bring it home.
All right. Well, can you hear me? Well, thank you very much for your invitation. And first of all, I would like to honor the memory of Jina, Mahsa, Amini, who was killed in the hand of the regime a year ago, and hundreds more who have been tortured, raped, killed, executed publicly since. And we hope that this movement continues, and we know it would. Mahsa's movement is continuation of the Green Movement. Regime is incapable of controlling people. As we say, when those on top cannot, and those at the bottom, they don't want to, that is the end of the regime. And this is basically in a struggle for the regime to buy time, and as we have seen in other autocrats and autocracies, the end will come. And we are hoping the sooner the better, as far as this brutal regime is concerned. Now, the subject is sanction, and President Woodrow Wilson famously said, sanctions are peaceful, silent, deadly remedies. And he's right. He's right for the fact that if sanctions are implemented correctly, they are a remedy. And if they are not implemented correctly, they are deadly. We have seen throughout the history, we have seen, for example, success of sanctions against South Africa, apartheid. Because of the international community and pressure, it caused the regime of apartheid change. And we have seen the failure vis-a-vis Cuba. For decades, sanctions, embargo, nothing has changed. And reason is because these sanctions regimes are not implemented and enforced properly. And because perhaps we are taking one-size-fits-all when it comes to sanctions, without taking into account idiosyncrasies of each society, cultural, socially, political environment. And that's why we need to look at sanctions as a foreign policy. And as a foreign policy, like any other policy, in my view, it is a four-legged stool. The first leg is, what is the strategy? What is it that we want to achieve? What is the goal? Is it, for example, vis-a-vis Iran, is it regime change? Is it change of behavior? What is it? The next leg is measures, tactics. What are the measures that we must undertake to achieve those goals, to fulfill those objectives? The third one is enforcement. How we are going to enforce those measures in order to fulfill those goals, to achieve those objectives. And the fourth one is universal support. Without the universal support, sanctions would not work. We have seen, for example, during the Obama administration and during the JCPOA or nuclear deal, the objective was getting the regime to the negotiation table and on the enrichment of uranium. And it was a policy of carrot and stick. And it worked. To some extent, it worked. Regime came to negotiation table, and on the back end of it received billions of dollars. And but nothing has changed as far as the society is concerned, as far as democracy is concerned. Many of us, even during the Obama administration, we were pushing to include issue of human rights as part of the negotiation, as part of what it was not done. So in Iran, we see the sanctions, they have been impacted negatively for the past 40 years, 44 years. It goes back to 1979 when during the hostage crisis, the first set of sanction regimes were imposed. The areas of impacts of sanctions on Iran has been oil exports, exchange rate transactions, inflation that caused inflation to shoot up, and to kind of dampen the growth, economic growth. The second set of impacts are on the health issue. Because of sanctions, especially because of the secondary sanctions, there are two sets of sanctions. One is you sanction any kind of transactions with Iran. And then there are secondary sanctions. For example, we say we are going to give a general license for humanitarian, for civilian aircraft parts and so forth. But those companies that are supposedly get in touch and provide those, they are afraid to get involved because they don't want a sanction by the US government or the European countries as a secondary force behind it. So they are holding back. Therefore, it is causing tremendous impact, negative impact on the health and safety of Iranian. For example, we have those who are in need of chemotherapy. There is a shortage of medicine. Those who are in epilepsy, there is a shortage of that. There are those who are being burned, for example, severely. There is no medication for it. So people are being negatively impacted by these sanctions. The third one is, as we have seen, is immigration and basically immigration and academics. During the previous administration, so to speak, the maximum pressure sanction, and when the visas they got zapped. We have seen that immigration, how it was impacted. As an immigration practice attorney, I've seen it firsthand. That, for example, when the Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, was designated as a terrorist organization, suddenly people who are migrating to US, for example, somebody is married to a US citizen and she or he is applying for the spouse, person comes here, especially male, there is a compulsory military service in Iran. And there is no voluntary form of saying, okay, I don't want to work in Revolutionary Guard, I want to go in the, army. So just because that individual has served for 2 years in the Revolutionary Guard, suddenly that person is not eligible for immigration benefits. And we have seen that. Right now we have, as part of our practice, we have appeal in the federal court, And we are seeing more and more these kind of impacts. The same thing with academia. During the previous administration, many researchers, they could not come to US. Many educational institutions, that they had contracts with people to come in, they could not fulfill their contracts because visas were not available to those researchers, academia, to come here to US. So we say sanction is not only transaction, is not only commodity, but it encompasses a vast range of issues. And unfortunately, we see that again with this administration, as it was mentioned, it is basically is not implemented correctly. So there are many issues, there are legal issues that I want to go into and mention that. I'm sure it's going to come up during the Q&A, and we are going to address that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mike. All right, that's a lot to unpack, but I think it gives us a real good kind of foundation for our discussion. And I think what I'm hearing, whether it's in the poll or whether it's Alex or Mike, is, you know, that there's really not a whole of government strategy for Iran. Mike, you talked about 4 things on Iran: strategy, measures, enforcement. But before you have a strategy, you need a kind of objective. And I think what I'm hearing here is we really don't know what the objective is. So I'm going to start with you, Shaheen. What do you think the objective is, and is there really a whole of government strategy? I mean, each one of you is talking about different pieces of dealing with the administration, but there's really doesn't seem to be a whole of government effort towards a shared objective.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. To me, it seems that the administration just wants to kick the can down the road and just avoid Iran having a nuclear weapon. Or if that's come to pass, it happens later down the road that they don't have to deal with it. And to me, it seems that that's the only thing that they care about. But that's short-sighted, and that's I think it's a problem that we have when politicians have to always look for the next election that's coming, in 2 years, and that hinders their ability to find a long-term approach. But I would submit that look at what happened with the attack on Salman Rushdie. Khomeini issued a fatwa against him in 1988, and somebody in 2022 in New York tried to carry it out. So Islamic terrorism is gonna approach our shores. We saw it on 9/11, but with a regime like Iran, they're gonna hurt us. They're gonna hurt the U.S. Maybe not now, maybe not using a nuclear weapon, but down the road, because it's their nature. And to just focus on the nuclear weapons in the short term, I think that might benefit the administration in the short term for the political reasons, but in the long term, I think it's misguided, and it will fail the U.S.
Mike Hall, because you deal with a lot with State Department programs, and it seems like, the right hand is, there's all these programs, but there's no kind of coordination.
Okay, sorry. I have a very loud voice that carries, so I thought maybe it would carry, but it doesn't really seem like, is there, all the offices aren't talking to one another, so, they'll give you some internet freedom, like all the different offices are doing programs that are they're either a duplicate or they're, they're antithetical to one another. And again, it doesn't seem as if the offices they don't want to get to a kind of coordinated whole of government strategy. It's like the funding program isn't meant to succeed.
I would say, I think that there's different objectives for each of the programs, and I think that everybody's doing their best to try to make sure that they don't overlap each other. There's also new agencies or new organizations being brought up into it. I would say, I think the key ingredient here is for just some more flexibility in terms of being able to have a separate group that could step in and say, you know what, there's this program over here that's focusing on innovation. There's another program over here that's focusing on some of the run rate costs of the success of a given piece of innovation and that kind of thing. And for somebody to be able to sort of say, look, you know what, there's something happening in Iran right now. There's 9.5 million people. We need to be able to tap into that for either the short term or the long term. And I think that that's really I would say the only missing piece right now is the ability for, because each of these groups have their own funding cycles and all their own kinds of things.
Well, I want to push back a little bit. Is funding the panacea? I mean, it doesn't seem as if you don't have a kind of like you obviously would like more money. And we've talked about, we talked about a little bit in the last program with Eric about how, even would we be able to absorb, would these groups be able to absorb the money? There's that issue, but there's also the issue is if there's not a common goal, then money really isn't going to be the issue here, right?
Right, and I think maybe that's the the nature of the NOSA Funding Opportunity Grant Program is such that it's smaller organizations that are eligible and that kind of thing. I think that I would say the next big step is so there's internet freedom funding that allows organizations to meet the certain needs, but I would say that there needs to be internet freedom infrastructure funding, which would allow some of the more innovative techniques and that kind of thing that are staying ahead of these massive, filtering systems and that kind of thing, to be able to bring to bear, quite frankly, the might of the U.S. tech sector. And I think you see, like, for example, recently the OFAC license was modified. That helped embolden some of the larger tech companies to actually step into things a little bit more, or at least not step away from it. So there's incremental advances being made here. I think that the real issue is this is a growing problem all over the world. It's not just Iran, there's all over the place. And so each agency has its own kind of focus. I think that if there could be a funding mechanism that would allow, so it's not just about more money, because there is the aspect of, like, if you have millions of people on your network, it costs 10 cents a person for that person to be on for the day or something like that. There is a run rate cost, a gas fee, if nothing else, when I look at it. I think that the issue now is to be able to take some of these things, there's a lot of amazing research that's going on, and start to embed it into commercial systems. And when I say commercial systems, I mean, just like, for example, once HTTPS came along, banking.
Well, but again, like, that would suppose that the goal is really, that there's a goal to really kind of get the opposition together and unite them. And I want to talk to you a little bit, Alex. I mean, does anyone want significant change? I mean, look, let's just kind of stipulate right here that all of the oppositions, most of the opposition, we have the MEK and we've talked about them, but by and large, the opposition's goals are noble. They're fighting for their freedom. That's without question. However, we've been here in 2009, we've been here in 2012, we're here again. The current wave is fading a little bit. What did we gain other than the regime is bad? I mean, on the activist side, there's no leader. The U.S. kind of says, well, we can't really, and they do this on Afghanistan too, it's really better if it happens organically, and we can't support them because we'll give them a bad name and, you know, whatever, as Jim and I have talked about. But is that a way of hiding that there's no strategic policy? And, you know, how is this affecting what the opposition is really able to do and the impact if no one really wants significant change? Yes.
So I can speak anecdotally for a second about the fact that I think that the community, we've seen them awaken now in a way we've never really seen before. Certainly in my 38 years, I've never seen it. And I live in Irvine, California. We have a large Iranian community there. Every Sunday for 12 months, the community, hundreds of Iranians protest on the streets of Barranca and Culver in Irvine, demanding that people pay attention to this ongoing crisis. And
but what I'm trying to say is, other than naming and shaming and us getting together
Sure.
and agreeing that the regime is bad, like, where are we going with this? And
Sure.
what can the U.S. do differently to help you really make inroads?
Yeah, so in the 118th Congress, there were 28 pieces of legislation that were introduced specific to foreign policy with Iran. 18 were bills, 10 were resolutions. Of those bills, 12 are advocating for additional sanctions only, 2 relate to the nuclear threat of Iran, 6 are about various topics such as support for religious minorities or special licensing. And while all 9 resolutions are heartwarming support for the people of Iran, one resolution about the nuclear threat of Iran, none has a substantial action tied to it that helps the people of Iran. So what we can tell from actually polling the Iranian American electorate, and as we saw, 90% of Iranians in California have family in Iran. So we can assume that they have a connection to the voices of the people in Iran. The top issues for Iranian American voters here is to develop a comprehensive policy. We are clear that after 4 decades of the Iranian diaspora having expatted here, that there is not a comprehensive policy. So now is the time to develop that policy. And one of the most important things is to provide a legal pathway to provide financial support to the most vulnerable people in Iran. There has been a dramatic decline in middle income levels over recent years, which narrowed the gap between those living above and below the poverty line. So in Iran, the poverty line signifies the income threshold necessary to meet a household's essential needs, with incomes falling below this mark labeled as absolute poverty. Iranian authorities report that the poverty line for Tehran residents stands at around 300,000 rials, which is approximately $600 per month, which is 3 times the country's minimum wage. So creating a legal pathway for the families here to provide financial support to the Iranians in Iran, that would be a nice start. That would be a good way we can take micro actions that support the Iranian people as we go through this developing of a new comprehensive policy.
Jim, you want to weigh in?
Yes, just wanted to follow up on something. If I may, to follow up on something that was mentioned by Mike, and also was touched on in the poll for sanctions. Mike Cole mentioned the general license, the D2 license was expanded last year. And the tech community, especially the United States tech community, has been more energized and motivated to do things to help the Iranian people. Is the D2 license and the expansion, I believe about a year ago today, is that enough? Is there other parts of the OFAC enforcement program and the license program to help the tech community become fully engaged? And if so, does that need to be a legislative solution, or can we do as an executive action on the licenses?
Well, there's always more that can be done to help American companies understand where they can help facilitate using their technology to help facilitate the problem. Now that said, they all have their own mission. And often when the OFAC licenses are updated, it allows different groups within these larger companies to actually start to take meetings and have real technical discussions. think that's very important. I think that this is the next phase of internet freedom within, in the US is clearly leading this charge. There's really nobody else funding this at any level at all around the world. And so I think that the more that could be done, and again, maybe open it up so that internet freedom programs can start to work with these larger organizations, because as I was just going to say, like if you have it as a core piece of the internet writ large, now everybody can tap into it. And that's the important thing to have ready for the next big surge, is to not necessarily have to depend on custom protocols written by grantees that are holding up sticks and twigs to keep everything together. Instead, to know that when a surge of 10x comes in from any country around the world, that there is a infrastructure that's ready to absorb that, and that the funds that are required to provide that service are available. But that's really the two things I would say to take it up to the next level. As I say, the Internet Freedom Program from the Congress is world leading. It is the only reason why the people in Iran have any voice right now at all. And I think it's important to recognize that if you wanted to keep stepping into it, it can be done quite skillfully and with not that much money in the grand scheme of things, but more about providing the capability for everybody to get involved. Because as soon as it's part of the internet backbone, the beauty of the internet is everybody has to peer. Even the Iranian ISPs have to peer with all of the rest of the world and that kind of thing. This is the ultimate way of sort of just boiling this problem away by just making it so that, just like with everybody uses their bank right now on the internet, it wasn't until they came up with adding a secure layer on top of the HTTP protocol that happened. But look what happened when that happened. And I think that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, Mike, very specifically, if I may just follow up, is Siphon being pushed out and available through Apple and Android? Is Google Play Store is very limited in Iran? Is this a license issues? Is this a game changer for pushing out solutions, circumvention technologies like Siphon?
I think that it's not necessarily where it's sitting in the stores. There's a famous example. Apple does not allow any VPNs at all in the China store, and as a result, VPNs have almost no play in there. So there is sort of like times where that happens. I don't know that that's a D1 licensing issue. The D1 licensing issue was more to make sure that if you send something at all, regardless of what platform, that's going to be okay. I think that is the leadership that came. That OFAC license was one of the most important things that happened, and now it's been leveled up. Now we need to level up into commercial infrastructure. Once it's all in the commercial infrastructure and Siphon protocols or other working protocols are there, that this problem starts to go away, because it's always available regardless of where it's going to be coming around the world. And it's easy to tap in and keep track of that, but it's got to get put in the first place.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. I'm going to take both questions and then we'll open it up to the panel.
Thanks so much, Mike. In line with those conversations, the U.S. government mentioned that they are providing VPN access to over 40 million Iranians in a rotation manner. And speaking to especially activists and those that are mobilizing in Iran, they say that they still have to pay for several VPNs to even have access. So I really like to understand how the people inside Iran are getting access to these and who's making the money in the middle, because you guys are providing it, but why are they paying for it to get it?
Good question.
It might not be popular for me. I've always made points that
We
I'm
don't
not.
care about being popular.
Okay, thank you. You asked about, who are the figures, there is no one opposition figure. So going back to Gaman, Gaman did two polls, 2022 and 2023, and there's another poll, ERFI, and overwhelmingly Reza Pahlavi comes on top as someone, perhaps not only because they want kingship, but as an individual. that has garnered more support. I mean, his popularity was the only one in double digits, whereas the rest were like in single digits. And Mariam Rajavi was actually 0.01%.
Well, okay, I want to pick up on that. The popularity of in Congress of the MEK, what is that about? Is that because they're getting money from that? Is that because it's, there's a lot of money, not just going to super PACs and things like that, but when you leave Congress, you know that you're going to get a big fat check to make a speech, just like Giuliani did, just like so many else did. So maybe you can take that, and then Mike, quickly take the VPN question, and then I want to open it up to the rest.
Yes.
I've got two other points as well. if I
Okay,
may.
quickly though.
Quickly.
We're running out
I
of
mean,
time.
on giving IRGC people, visas to emigrate here, and the question of secondary sanctions by medical. I mean, there are reports we've covered that, inside Iran, there are the mafia that take control of the medicine and they just hoard it. So there is that kind of an action inside as well. And how do you reconcile the fact that there are so many relatives of regime officials living here in the United States? And Lily mentioned that even the chief of police, visits Canada. I mean, there is that discrepancy as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So you know what? Let's kind of wrap some of that stuff into where we have just about 3 minutes. So why don't we have each person just, fold in some of what they want to fold in from those two questions and into some closing remarks. Mike, I want to start with you.
Okay, I'll just address the cost thing. So Saifan does not charge any Iranians any money for the software. We wouldn't be allowed to because of sanctions. But it's well known that there are organizations within Iran that are clearly in cahoots with the government that do charge, and so it works well. And those work well. They charge money, and Iranians use them. The real issue that I was trying to bring to bear here is around protests and the fact that they shut those down during the protests. So the Saifon's the only thing left sitting there, and that's another reason why there's a big drive in the number of users that come up. And again, in some ways, I know you don't want to be sort of like, just give me more money, it'll all work. But actually, in the case of internet, when you're developing software like this, you make an innovation. When that innovation works and it works really well, then everybody starts using your software. And none of the, and again, I mentioned that it's not free for them to use our software. It costs us money. We have to pay other commercial vendors and that kind of thing. There was a call by the White House regarding internet freedom in general that talked about how it wanted to have the big tech companies in the U.S. get more involved. And so there is some strategy coming on that side of thing. I think that the real issue is if you want to keep it free for the people of Iran, Saifan, honestly, we could use 3 times the capacity that we have for Iranian people. As I mentioned before, everybody that's working on the grants programs are doing their best to get the funding that is available, but there's not that much, and it's divided up amongst a lot of people, whereas everybody's on the Saifan network. Okay. So there's just there can just be these moments, especially during these big protests. So.
Thanks, Mike. Mike, do you want to just offer some closing remarks in the frame of what kind of sanctions regime would have a triple effect, right? Punish the regime, not hurt the Iranian people, and give some leverage to the opposition.
Well, to be more cynical, we go back to the U.S. policies. I don't think the U.S. policy is to change the regime. The regime has been one of the best elements in the neighborhood for
the Arabs.
For the U.S. government to dump all the military gadgets in the Saudi Arabia and Emirates and kind of make this Iran regime a scarecrow. So in that sense, it's working. But in terms of targeted, what you mentioned, we always been in favor of targeted sanctions. as you mentioned and as Lily mentioned, you have children of Shamkhani, who was the commander of the Iranian regime's navy in San Diego, living in a multi-million-dollar mansion, and he's 25 years old. We know where the money comes from. We know that all these sanctions that they are creating without any good strategy is causing that mafia, the mafioso in Iran, make tons of money, send it outside, and although not under their own name, mostly in Canada, we know that is the biggest population of the regime operatives, but even in the U.S. We need targeted sanctions. We need, as it was mentioned by Lily, we need visas of these individuals revoked. We need them deported. We need assets, whether it's under spouse's name, children's name. We need those to be frozen. So the regime is feeling the heat, and not the Iranian people. Right now, the Iranian people are being is a collective punishment of Iranian people, and at the same time, you're expecting them to rise up again and again and again and get killed, while the U.S., including the Biden administration, suddenly is in chummy relationship with the regime and release of $6 billion fund, which we know, although it was said that it has a mechanism for controlling it, but we know there is no mechanism that regime cannot bypass. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shaheen.
All right, I'm just going to say that there is such a thing as American values and democracy and human rights. Not everything is just crass national interest. If the U.S. government, if the U.S. president would say that Iranian people deserve to have a democratic government and they deserve to have a secular government, and that's the right that the Iran regime has deprived them of, even that just mere statement, I think would have a tremendous effect. There's a way of talking about it. There's a way to mildly criticize the Iran government and at the same time giving it legitimacy, saying that, they did this thing that we didn't like. But in that mild criticism, you're implying that the regime is legitimate. But there's another way of talking. You could just say that Iranian people deserve to have a secular democracy like the people in
The
Europe.
Trump administration used to speak about.
No. Trump specifically stated that Iran can be a great country with the same leaders.
Yeah.
Trump said that. So, no, it's not a Democrat-Republican issue.
I don't mean a Republican issue, but they were much tougher on the, I think.
They were tougher, but I don't think it was partly
Not the
about
best
democracy.
decision
Yeah. But, Secretary Blinken initially said that human rights is at the center of our foreign policy. Well, that is not. But, even in making statements, if it's genuine, I think, and if particularly secularism is mentioned, and the U.S. government speaks in the way that says that democracy and secularism is something that people in Iran deserve, just like people in America deserve it, then that's a signal that this regime, the free world wants this regime to be on its way out, and the free world should want this regime to be on its way out.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, so to your point about some polling that was conducted last year, IADC's poll that was conducted just recently showed a similar result to one that was conducted by the Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans in January of this year. But what we found was that the views of the Iranian American community have evolved greatly over the past few months, and that they've hardened. And we know that that's because there's been a great deal of change to the socio-political landscape in Iran. At the time of the national poll by PAIA, a coalition of prominent opposition groups had formed called the Mahsa coalition that only lasted a couple months. And since then, the Iranian regime has given harsh sentences, executed peaceful protesters and young people. And so what we found is that while Reza Pahlavi may have a great deal of goodwill amongst the Iranian community here and maybe even in Iran, that the Iranian community is speaking almost uniformly with one voice. The majority of respondents are saying we want a constitutional democratic republic in Iran, and that is the ultimate goal, I think. So I think as we tie up this conversation about developing a new comprehensive policy towards Iran, what we have to consider is dealing with the income inequality and absolute poverty of Iran. That folds into the pro-democracy interests of the people in Iran. So as we discuss this, how we bring a constitutional democratic republic to Iran, let's also look at the income inequality and poverty in Iran as a way of providing resources and access to the people on the ground inside Iran who are striving for a new government.
Thank you to this excellent panel. I think it was a great build on our previous discussion. A lot of this information will be on the
IranianDems.org, and also really briefly, we want to thank the International Republican Institute, Saifan, the Department of State, Kaibu Inc., Senator Chris Murphy, the Washington Kurdish Institute, Tomasz Salehi Foundation, Representative Michael Levin, and various government officials who contributed to making this happen, and to our polling. And as a personal thank you, our President Emeritus Sudi Faroknia and Faye Hazar, and Parjan Khosravi, thank you so much for putting this together.
Thank you, and thank you to the IADC and also to the Democracy Council and Jim Prince. I think it's important that we keep the issue alive, not just on these anniversaries, or not just when there's, unfortunately, a crisis with, protests and everything. We need to, in fact, the most important time to keep it alive is when it's not in the news. So we have to keep having these discussions, and hopefully we won't be here, maybe we'll have some positive news in the year ahead. Thank you.